There's a question that I keep coming back to. If people want to eat in a way that supports their well-being and their health, why is the food system moving in the opposite direction? For instance, when we used to produce our functional snacks as part of Well, we were making our products with very high quality ingredients, whole foods, actually effective quantities, like therapeutic quantities of functional ingredient. There was demand, there was excitement and energy around what we were creating, but the pressure to cut costs, reformulate, and make things more processed was definitely much stronger than the pressure to nourish. And to be frank, one of the only paths towards success. That disconnect never really sat right with me, especially because I'd meet with retailers who said they wanted these things, but they never really wanted to pay for these things. And frankly, a lot of consumers couldn't afford to pay what these things cost. But this wasn't necessarily a Well-specific problem. This is definitely widespread. Another example of this, and you can kind of put anything else about this brand to the side, is Miyoko's cheese brand. This essentially, she was pushed out of the brand and there was a recent opportunity to buy it back, and she tried to buy it back. She was not successful. However, if you look under the comments about this, there's so many people saying, gosh, I wish they maintained the original formulas. Now they've added all these other things to it to, maintain costs, or whatever the case might be. Regardless of what happened with the brand, there's still this same sentiment that people wanted one thing, but scaling, growing, or making money necessitated something else. So today we're asking why. Why are consumers moving towards simpler, natural foods, while companies are doubling down on processing and engineered alternatives? What is driving the disconnect, and what does it mean for people who are already managing chronic illness, limited energy, or unpredictable access to nourishing food? Let's start with what people are choosing. Across the country, people are choosing options that help them to feel well. Whole grain intake across the US has increased by about 50% over the last decade, and interest in naturally functional foods is rising. 94% of Gen Z say they prefer foods with natural functional benefits. Searches related to blood sugar, fiber, insulin resistance, and metabolic health have grown significantly over the last 5 years. People are noticing how food affects their energy, inflammation, and their mood. They just want honesty from brands and clarity in their ingredients. And most of all, they just want foods to help them maintain some sort of stability and balance versus foods that leave them fighting to feel like themselves. In reality, consumers are not confused. They are paying closer attention than ever before, and they're armed with way more information than ever before. If this is what consumers want, then what is the industry doing? Now, don't get me wrong. There are spots in the industry where people are leaning into these consumer demands and interests and needs. However, if we look at the big players in the industry, and that's really what we're focusing on today, I'm not sure you could say the same thing. And that's because if you look at the trend towards where companies are investing, it's the opposite from what we're seeing that consumers want. More than half of the calories Americans consume now come from ultra-processed foods. For some groups, especially children, that number is even higher. And this isn't necessarily a reflection of people want. This is a reflection of what the system is structured to produce. Companies are coming up with ways to reformulate products using cheaper and cheaper inputs. They're relying more heavily on engineering, additives, and processing to reduce cost and increase shelf life. When you look at where they're investing, it's in cultivated and synthetic proteins because they can scale that. None of these things are inherently bad per se, but they clearly prioritize efficiency over nourishment. For food companies in particular, is not necessarily about the latest consumer demands and needs. It's about margins in an industry where margins are already quite thin. And on top of that, you have to consider and layer in the increasing supply chain pressure plus shareholder expectations. And every time we add another one of these layers to the complexity of the food industry and the food business, the gap between our food and nutrition widens. While these things are happening and companies are making these choices to make investments, consumers are still pushing and demanding more clarity. And there are some areas where we are starting to see some shifts despite the greater industry trends. For instance, 85% of Americans say they want cleaner ingredient labels, and 94% of them want companies to disclose how foods are processed, not just what's in them. So many people are avoiding long ingredient lists because they find them confusing, or because they feel like they can't trust what they don't understand. California recently became the first state to formally define ultra-processed foods using a standardized framework. We're now seeing that other states, including New York and Colorado, are exploring similar steps. In addition to that, several advocacy group and nutrition researchers are working towards stronger transparency at the national level. As these changes are happening, pushback is coming from large corporations who rely on these complex formulations. These clear definitions would require companies to make changes that they don't want to make, resulting in transparency becoming more of a negotiation versus a norm. This further adds to the disconnect where companies want to protect this complexity because it protects their bottom line. So what does this mean for people with chronic illness? When more than half of the national diet is made up of ultra-processed foods, it becomes increasingly difficult to choose foods that support blood sugar, lower inflammation, digestion, and energy. When you layer in regional availability, pricing, and supply chain volatility, these factors create real barriers that have nothing to do with consumers' needs. So what are you supposed to do if realistically our system is not designed in a way that necessarily supports what your needs are, particularly if you're living with chronic illness? Here's the thing, we're not going to fix the entire food system overnight. And you don't need to fix the entire food system to support your health or to support the health of the people in your community. Start with small choices, because these small choices can live alongside financial limitations, time constraints, being able to eat your cultural foods, or the reality of just being tired and stretched too thin. For instance, you can choose whole grains when possible. You can compare just 2 versions of a product and pick the one that feels better for what your body needs. Or you can lean into your cultural foods that have nourished families, your family for generations. And if you need adaptations to those foods, approach it that way. And if you notice brands reformulating in ways that are not helpful for you, just avoid them if you can. And these are just some supports. I think it's very easy to get overwhelmed, but the most important thing you can do is just remember that it's possible to just start with one small thing. Consumers have been asking for better food for years. Many companies simply cannot or will not prioritize that over profit. But the beauty is your health doesn't rely on the perfection of you or these companies for that matter. It relies on understanding the context, your access, your capacity, and your needs in the moment. And all of these small choices you have to make, they also have to live alongside real life. All that is to say, we live in a system where this tension, at least for the near future, will persist. So we have to learn how to support ourselves within it. And the annoying and unfortunate truth is that that puts the labor on consumers to find better choices that support their well-being.